Namaskar and good morning, everybody, to our morning show in Think Tank India. We have a special guest today, Mr. Salvatore Babones. He himself is an American, but for last 16 years, he is settled in Sydney, Australia, and he is as an associate professor in sociology in the University of Sydney. He is also a political analyst and also a very big Indian fan. He is not only Indian fan, he is also a fan of Indian democracy and Indian politics. And today we'll discuss with him on Indian democracy and politics. So, sir, welcome to our show. How you are enjoying to attend in our show in a small channel called Think Tank India.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate the being here. It's a great chance to meet new people, and I always enjoy that immensely.
So, sir, first tell us something about yourself.
Tell you something about me. It sounds like we're on a date instead of a podcast. I'm not. I'm not sure what to tell you. Look, I'm a mostly a quantitative comparative sociologist. Whose training had been in the study of country level data. And I've written books about, well, one book in particular about the use of country data for comparisons. I've also edited several books on measurement theory. And I come to the study of India not as an expert on India, but much more as an expert on rankings, that is, on an expert on the international data. And it's been just an absolute pleasure for me to learn so much about India. So for the past 5 years, I have been very deeply delving into the source material on India. And compared to the other countries I've studied, so I've done some pretty intensive work on Russia and East Central Europe and on China in the past. But compared to these other countries, it's been such a pleasure studying India because, of course, so many of the sources are in English, which means that I've been able to go back and read virtually all the founding documents of the Indian Republic, of the Indian independence movement. Not only did major figures give speeches in English, but on top of that, you can go to the newspaper archives and get, paper of record newspaper articles in English. The Constituent Assembly debates were conducted in English. Of course, when Nehru spoke at midnight on April 14th, 1947, he spoke in English, right? So it's been a great pleasure for me, unlike many of the other countries I've studied, to be able to get so deeply into the source material on India. And not only that, but to follow contemporary debates. Again, while I miss out on the entire Hindi language media and the regional media in India, nonetheless, I'm able to follow the English language media without any problem. And so I feel like I've had, Shekhar Gupta in my home every day now, 6 days a week for 5 years. Rajdeep Sardesai, people get upset that I follow him. And I say, why should you be upset? We should learn from everybody. I've learned an enormous amount from Sardesai. And many others who I've been able to follow. Of course, I follow many podcasts that, again, I can't follow the Hindi or Bengali or Malayalam podcasts or Telugu podcasts, but lots of the podcasts are in English. I've even started watching Indian comedy and enjoy Indian stand-up comedy, which, again, much of it is in English, which is just a great pleasure for me.
Sir, my question related to this was also, how you become interested on Indian politics?
I always try to make a distinction between Indian politics and Indian democracy. Professionally, I'm interested in Indian democracy. And I came to the study of India initially to study the economy. And I wrote a few articles about the Indian economy in the late 2010s. And that's because my focus in the first phase of my academic career, from my PhD in 2003, all the way up to 2019 or so, my focus was on understanding the trajectory of economic development fundamentally in post-socialist transition economies. So the areas I focused on were not just middle-income countries, but specifically middle-income post-socialist economies. But in the 2010s, I started getting very interested in broader issues of nation building, nationhood, and national identity. And that culminated, and I wrote a few papers on nationhood in China and in Russia. But the study of Indian nationhood is something that's first incredibly fascinating, but second, it is statistically important. It's important because India has long been known to be the only poor post-socialist economy, poor post-colonial economy to have remained a democracy throughout its history. Now, I say that categorically, and someone may say, what about Belize or what about, a small island state? It's like, okay, among major countries that have a large population that achieved independence early, I can't really compare India to a country of 800,000 people that became independent in the 1980s, right? So let's stick with major post-colonial states. India is the only one that was not only born a democracy, most countries are born democracies these days, but remained a constitutional democracy throughout its entire history. Now, we can quibble over the emergency. The emergency was conducted in line with India's constitution. Indira Gandhi ultimately held an election. We can debate about the status of democracy during the emergency, but even if I say, how many countries have been a democracy since 1977? Just for the last, 4.5 decades. India is by a factor of 10, not by a little bit, by a factor of 10, the poorest country to have been a democracy for the last 45 years. That striking quantitative result, to me, was worthy of study. And I felt that it had not really ever been answered. India was simply either treated as an exception, that is, poor post-colonial states are not democracies, except India. And a lot of people felt that that exception was due to India's British heritage. Or on the other side, people argued, well, India is not really a democracy. And I was not convinced by either of those theses. First, if British heritage was responsible for India's democracy, why isn't Pakistan a democracy? Why isn't Bangladesh a democracy? Why has Kenya had so much trouble with democracy? Why does Uganda have so much trouble? I mean, how come only this one British colony out of all the dozens of British colonies had no problems with democracy? And then on the other hand, people say, well, no, India is not really a democracy. I started looking at that and I said, well, all the evidence that India is not a democracy comes from the qualitative judgments of people who themselves have very strong political opinions about Indian democracy or about India. And my strong impression was they were fighting their political battles out in the academic space. And so I wasn't convinced by either of these arguments. I remain convinced that India is a robust, healthy democracy that is similar in its institutions to any Western European or North American democracy. And then the question became why. And I'm in the middle of writing a book on trying to understand why India has remained a democracy when other countries have not. Now, I'm sorry, that's a very long answer. I'll very briefly say I'm also interested in Indian politics, but purely as a Twitter troll, not as someone who studies Indian politics. So I'm no expert on who's going to win which election where. I just find Indian politics fascinating, and I love joking about it. But if you look at my serious writing, I've never written seriously about Indian politics. I've only written seriously about Indian democracy.
Sir, how India become a pilgrimage of democracy and Pakistan failed on this front?
I would say, unfortunately, India has not become a pilgrimage place for democracy. I think it should. In my view, the importance of India is that it has the opportunity to be a true Vishwaguru, a true teacher of the world. Now, when Mr. Modi uses that word, he means a Vishwaguru of development. India, I'm sorry, people may be offended. India can't particularly teach the world about development. Yes, India is developing, but many other countries have developed. If you want a Vishwaguru for development, go to Taiwan, go to South Korea, or go to Japan. What India is a Vishwaguru for democracy. It has not been. People don't come to India to study India's democracy, to learn lessons they can take back to their own countries. They should. And if I could make one recommendation to the Indian government, it would be to found something like, an Institute of Democracy in India that is dedicated to teaching people from other countries how things are done in India in a very quotidian, day-to-day sense. So, for example, a visiting delegation from an African country that's a new democracy may wonder, how do we set up an electoral commission? Well, Indian Institute of Democracy could offer master classes for this, teaching them how it's done in India. Another group might come and say, how do we stop vote buying? Vote buying is a serious problem in our country. Well, again, they come to India, and India can try to teach how to stop vote buying. How do we form political parties in an environment that's very poor? Well, India has many, many political parties, and India could teach people from other developing countries how to found a political party, how to get it funded, how to operate it administratively. And again, not because India does these things perfectly, but because India does these things to global standard on a very small budget. Other countries that do this at a global standard are 10 or 20 or even 50 times as rich as India. India does it all, but does it in a way that other poor countries could learn from.
And what's about Pakistan? How it failed on democratical front?
Look, I don't want this to, I'm not in the business of Pakistan bashing. I think it's very clear that Pakistan has had a troubled history, that Pakistan has not succeeded as a democracy, that it has had an extreme presence of both religion and of the military in its democratic institutions, and that both of those have undermined Pakistani democracy. There's also been an element of anti-Bengali, in early Pakistan, an element of anti-Bengali racism in Pakistan. Now that Bangladesh, since 1971, has been an independent country, that's no longer an issue. But Pakistan has had serious problems, and if anything, it deserves our sympathy and hopefully our support. I hope all of us, especially including India, should want to see a peaceful, democratic Pakistan. And I know that sensitivities on the Pakistan side prevent Pakistanis from learning from India. The most natural place for Pakistan to learn from would be India. I mean, if you're a Punjabi Pakistan politician and you want to learn how to do democracy properly, why not go to Punjab in India, just across the border where they speak the same language, and learn lessons? I understand, obviously, I'm sophisticated enough to understand that politically that's not possible. But in an ideal world, maybe we could see indirect aid. Maybe we could see something that I would love to see: Pakistani and Indian low-level politicians, local levels. Don't even forget about state, local level politicians going to a third country, going to a seminar in Abu Dhabi, or going to a seminar, if you prefer a democratic country, in Australia, and getting to talk to each other outside of India and Pakistan, to hopefully learn lessons that Pakistan can take back. So I know many Indians are anti-Pakistan. I'm not anti-Pakistan. I simply want to see a better Pakistan, and I'm convinced that a better Pakistan would also be better for India.
Sir, according to you, what is the future of Congress Party in India?
Look, I know.
And with this, I am also
always
connecting a question. The BJP has become the Congress Party of first decades of democratic India.
Look, I'm always very frank, and I don't want to involve myself in Indian politics, but I do want to give friendly and frank advice to Indians. If anyone who's fair-minded takes a look at the 21st century and politics in the 21st century and what is likely to succeed in the 21st century, nobody is going to say that what we need in the 21st century is a family-run party that passes down authority from parents to children, with the family remaining the conscience of the party that holds it together. Nobody thinks that family parties are the future of democracy. And for good or for bad, today's Congress Party, not the Congress Party of 1960, Today's Congress Party is Indira's Congress Party, and it is fundamentally a Indira Gandhi's and her descendants' family party. That has to change not for the good of just for the good of the Congress Party. It has to change for the good of Indian democracy. Right now, the Congress Party remains the only credible national alternative. There are many local alternatives to the BJP. The Congress Party is the only credible national alternative to the BJP, and Indian democracy would benefit from that national alternative being a strong, effective election fighting machine. Now, even if you're a BJP supporter, you should recognize that it would not be good for Indian democracy if the BJP simply had a dictatorship and no opposition. It's better for Indian democracy that the BJP have to fight for every single electorate against a well-organized opponent that keeps it on its toes. And here, I'm not speaking as a BJP supporter. I'm speaking what a BJP supporter should want is a BJP that's pushed to be the best party it can be by a very effective opponent. The problem right now for Indian democracy is that the opposition to the BJP simply is not up to the game. If I could speak to the Gandhi family, if I could, I've offered advice for Rahul on Twitter, but if I could seriously speak to the man, I would say, Rahul, why don't you be realistic? Your mother should retire from politics. You are an intellectual, not a politician. Why don't you found a think tank? And your think tank, you can set up to be the conscience of a country. Call it the Nehru Gandhi Institute or anything you like. And you, Rahul Gandhi, should offer your strongly worded views of how India should evolve, but liberate the party from the family. That is, you should recognize that for the good of India and for the good of the party, the best thing you can do is step back and say, it's someone else's time. And I think that's the only likely route to a rejuvenation of the Congress Party. Now, that's nothing personal about Rahul Gandhi. I'm not commenting on his qualities. I'm not calling him Papu or, I mean, no jokes. So leaving all jokes aside, the Congress Party could be more effective if people coming up through the ranks could feel that they have a realistic shot at becoming the party leader in the way Narendra Modi has become in the BJP. Through meritocracy, through fighting it out internally, through working hard. Family parties are not the way of the 21st century. Now, people may point to, America has dynasties. Look at the Bushes, look at the Kennedys. Look, the Kennedys in America do not decide who will be the candidates for the Democratic Party at all. Right? They simply have never had that level of power. Yes, they're an influential family, and if you are a descendant of one of Joseph Kennedy, you're likely to get a chance for a seat in a way that a non-Kennedy wouldn't. But the Kennedys don't run the party. In the Republican Party, the Bushes don't run the party, as we've seen from Donald Trump, the Donald Trump phenomenon. The Clintons don't run the Democratic Party. Everyone's fighting. Yes, there are prominent families, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Kennedys, now the Obamas, perhaps, you name it. The Trumps are now an influential family. Donald Trump put his daughter-in-law in charge of the Republican National Convention. Yes, there's family everywhere, but they're just one among many families. The idea of a family-owned and run party is just not going to win elections in the 21st century. It's time to step back.
And what is your opinion about BJP?
About the Aam Aadmi Party?
BJP.
Oh, BJP. Sorry. There are horns going on behind you. I didn't hear you. Look, the BJP is a very effective modern political party. And for every commentator in India who says that the BJP won because of its appeal to Hindu voters, and I hear this constantly. It's become the standard account of the BJP's success, that the BJP has succeeded in uniting Hindus who were previously divided by caste. That's not going to cut it as an explanation. First of all, most Hindus do not vote for the BJP. But looking beyond that, if you look for why they've won, I mean, they've had that same message of uniting Hindus ever since 1980. And if you go back to the Janasang, ever since 1948, I think the Janasang was founded. That mission of uniting Hindus has always been something they wanted to do. It's not the reason they win. The reason they win is superior modern organization. And you don't have to get this from the BJP's own sources. I encourage everyone, and all of you people out there who, I'm going to be a little personal now, who hate on me for always saying Rajdeep Sardesai is my guru. Rajdeep Sardesai can't stand me. Okay, he doesn't like me. That's fine. I don't think he's a very pleasant person. He's never reached out to me. He's never, fine. Read his book, because Rajdeep Sardesai is an extremely intelligent and perspicacious analyst. And Rajdeep Sardesai wrote in his book on the 2019 election that the BJP won, and he documented it over and over and over again. Superior organization, superior information technology. He thought it was unfair that the BJP made its people work weekends and evenings. And I thought, yeah, that's how you win an election. You work evenings and weekends. You make sure there's somebody at every polling booth, even polling booths that you expect to lose. You make sure there's someone there fighting your side. You get all those materials printed. You get all those WhatsApp messages out. You make your IT work. The BJP won in 2014 because of IT. It won in 2019 because it successfully navigated the transition from basic IT to social IT, to social media. And it's going to win in 2024 because it's continued to leverage its advantage in organization and technology. It will be matched by another party, whether it's the Congress, or if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have said potentially the Aam Aadmi Party, when those other parties match their organizational and technological advantages.
My last question to you: how Mr. Babones become a Modiboach, an ardent Modi fan?
I'm only a Modiboach in humor, and I've written on Twitter about being a Modiboach only because so many people accused me of it, and I appropriated the title. I'm not a Modiboach. Look, Mr. Modi is, by all accounts, an effective leader, but he's not a particularly effective leader. That is to say, he has not led India more effectively than previous leaders, including Manmohan Singh. He may have been a figurehead, but the Singh administration was very effective at fostering economic growth, modernizing the Indian military, building infrastructure. And people say, well, they built so much less infrastructure. I answer, yeah, they started from a much lower base. What they inherited from the Vajpayee government was much less than what Modi inherited from the Singh government. It's not about India's development. It's not about Mr. Modi. Now, the reason I've been called a Modiboach is that I don't disparage Mr. Modi. I don't see him. Most people of my social class, Western academics, want to see something particularly evil or dictatorial or even fascist about Mr. Modi. And all I see when I look at Mr. Modi is a politician. He's an effective politician and leader who does a basically good job running his country, who doesn't run into very many scandals, who's well-spoken, who does a competent job. And I don't see anything about him that is distinctively evil. And that seems to be, the accusation leveled at me is that if you don't call Modi evil, you're supporting him. And it's like, no, I'm now, what I can honestly be accused of is legitimating Narendra Modi. But he doesn't need my legitimation. He has the legitimation of hundreds of millions of Indian voters. I mean, he is a legitimate prime minister who obtained power through legitimate constitutional mechanisms, who rules India, administers India in accordance with the Indian constitution. I see nothing there to complain about. If that makes me a Modiboach, fine, apply the label. But I apply the label humorously because, like, look at me, like, what about me makes me a Modiboach? Nothing, except that I refuse to condemn the man when he hasn't done anything particularly worthy of condemning.
So, my co-anchor Urpita sent me a question on WhatsApp. What is your opinion that we saw at 2009 many Indian students were harassed and murdered in Australia? Now, for the last 3 months, we are also seeing. Okay, she also sent me the question. She wrote, Sir, I am Orpita. Welcome to Think Tank India. So, my question to you that how Indian students are safe in Australia. If we see that 2009 Indian students and also Indian rallying against racism and racism, and in Australia we saw that they were harassed by some Australian people. And now for I am also connecting with this that for last 3 months we are seeing at least 10 students were died in US and basically they were murdered. What is your opinion about this?
Look, there has been violence against Indian students in both Australia and the US, and there is some degree of racism, of anti-Indian racism. That said, I think that it's marginal, by which I mean that this is not the dominant position of either American or Australian society. In general, both American and Australian society welcome Indians, not just Indian students, but people of Indian origin in general. Look, the violence that has happened has been terrible, but all of your or most of your listeners will know that there was recently a random knifing attack in a shopping mall not far from my apartment here in Sydney, in which I believe 7 people were killed, and they were not Indians. They were just people who were unfortunate victims of criminal violence. I know that never makes anyone. That never helps a family whose child has been the victim of crime to point out that other people have children who've been the victims of crime. I just have to remind you that as a social scientist, my main focus is not in the tragedy, the individual tragedy of somebody who was wrongfully and reprehensibly targeted because of their ethnicity. Or national origin, which has happened. I'm not denying the crimes in any way whatsoever. My interest in it as a social scientist is the broader rate at which this happens. And my strong impression is that both in the US and in Australia, rates of criminality against Indians and Indian students are not particularly high. The United States in particular is a very violent country. Crime is very common. Australia, it's less so. But I think these are all examples of of societies that have a fringe element of which we would none of us civilized people would approve, but that fringe element does not represent the dominant view of society.
Thank you, sir. If you join us in our channel, we'll again invite you for another show. Please, this is my hardly invitation to you. Please come to our channel again, and audience, please keep watch the Think Tank India. Please share, subscribe, and like, and comment on this show. And please watch Think Tank India. Namaskar.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.